Hey guys, Skits here, and hope you're doing well. Today we are going to be talking about how my drug addiction kicked in full swing when I was 19 years old. All right, and the reason why we're talking about it is because it's a topic that is fresh. We actually started talking a little bit about this on the last live stream that I did. And if you want to go check that out, I'm going to leave the link of the live stream in the description down below. But I also thought it is a very cathartic and therapeutic thing, for me at least, to talk about. And it makes for a cool YouTube video, and maybe somebody who could empathize with me, or somebody who's going through a rough situation right now, or somebody who is going through what I went through when I was 19 years old. Maybe this YouTube video can be, like a step in the right direction towards making or taking a better decision. So to get right into it, right, I think I have to give a little context. So my first contact with drugs was with marijuana, and I started smoking weed when I was 12 to 13 years old. No less than 12, no later than 13. And this was right before I went to boarding school in Canada. And, when I started smoking marijuana, you could consider that I was what a lot of people in this world, like in the addiction or in the rehabilitation world, you would call a recreational smoker, right? And what does that mean? That means that I was just basically smoking, sporadically, or maybe on the weekends. I was maybe smoking at a friend's house, and the intervals between when I would smoke and not smoke, you could say that I would smoke less than just, try and lead a regular life. So at this moment, I was probably focusing on my studies. I was focusing on my, sports and my other co-ed activities, playing video games, listening to music, and weed. I would smoke weed as a recreational activity. Let's just, maybe get high from time to time. And maybe I was smoking once a week on the weekends, or maybe it was once every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks. It wasn't that important, and I was definitely not addicted. And then afterwards, when I was 15 years old, I had contact with alcohol. And it was during summer. I was with some friends. We were at a party, and we were basically playing spin the bottle, and some dares that people gave each other people to do consisted of, hey, have a little shot of this alcoholic beverage. Maybe it was like rum or tequila or vodka or whatever. And the first time that I drank, I got really drunk. And I had a negative association with alcohol, It was like feeling drunk and then puking, which actually happened to me. I started puking because I just mixed different liquors and I drank too much. I had a negative experience, and I kind of avoided alcohol. But that was definitely not the case with weed. Weed definitely, weed and I had a very, cool relationship as I was, growing up. And then I was probably a junior and a senior in high school, and you could say that partying and going to clubs and nightclubs or discotheques or going to house parties were starting to become a more common thing. And I definitely started drinking more. And my smoking marijuana was basically the same. The amount of weed that I smoked between 13 years old and maybe since the time that I graduated high school, my marijuana consumption was very sporadic. It was very recreational. And again, it's like marijuana didn't dictate and wasn't very significant in my life, nor my life, like my academics or my sports or my other activities like gaming and spending time with friends. Like marijuana did not negatively affect me. But I did start drinking maybe a little bit more and more. And there was a point where I started drinking more than smoking marijuana. And again, at this point in my life, I think it was also recreational. Drinking alcohol did not really represent a negative thing towards me, because in the same case as weed, like I was taking care of everything first, and then I was, drinking mostly at parties or at friends' house, and it wasn't affecting areas like the other areas in my life, right? But then I graduated high school and I went to study Mandarin in China with my best friend. And it was kind of like a sabbatical trip. And, we enlisted ourselves. We lived in Shanghai, China, and we studied in Shanghai Jiaotong University. And we probably lived like 3 blocks away from the university, in a area where there were also a lot of, foreigners, people from Europe, South America, North America, Africa, et cetera, et cetera. And, to also give you another context, when I was a junior and a senior in high school, I was also in a relationship. And you could say that I was in a relationship with the love of my life, or in a relationship with my high school sweetheart, and I was very much in love. It was a very emotionally intense relationship. It was kind of like, what Bella and Edward had going on in Twilight. I also have to admit that around this time, and more towards the end of our relationship, I was just a bad kid. I was just a terrible boyfriend, and I was just also a horny teenager. Basically, I was cheating on my girl a lot, and in return, she was also cheating on me, and you could say that our relationship was very toxic. And when I graduated high school, I moved to China, and she moves to Switzerland, and we basically started long distance dating, or we were doing in a long distance relationship. And I was also being a terrible boyfriend and a terrible human being. And I was seeing, different women in China. And she was in Switzerland. She was starting to have this kind of like affair with somebody. And we started basically drifting apart. I go to visit her in Switzerland in 2007 in like winter break. So between like December and January. And dog, I don't know if the noise outside is going to make a difference in the audio right here in the room, but there's like somebody who's drilling or somebody who's using this like construction tool, and it's very loud. I'm gonna have to check this in post to see if the audio is all right. But anyways, so I go visit her to Switzerland. I go to Switzerland basically on like winter break. We spend like 2 weeks, 3 weeks together tops. And yeah, after I return and after I go back to China, she starts kind of having this affair with this guy. And we started very much drifting apart. And then at one point, we were so like far apart emotionally from each other. And well, I'm gonna speak for myself, and I'm not gonna speak for her, but we were drifting very, very far apart. And it was, we were in a point where you could basically say we were not talking a lot. And every time we talked, there was like a discussion, or we would argue, we would fight. And, we were probably nearing the end of the relationship. And I just couldn't deal with it emotionally. And I had a very, very intense episode of being lovesick or being heartbroken. And yeah, we broke up. We broke up, and the way that we broke up was probably the worst way you could separate or say goodbye to another person. So the last time that we talked, we probably said the meanest things to each other. We were very visceral with our word choice. We were very visceral with the tone of the way we were just talking about each other. And I probably was, spiraling out of control. And, when I realized, that this was completely over and there was so much damage done from me to her, and I was kind of sure that there was no way in hell there could be, a recovery or we would get back together type thing. I just started spiraling out of control, and I have to admit, I did not deal with this, the best way. And to cope with the pain of being so heartbroken or so lovesick, then I started using drugs to kind of masquerade and get through or get by the pain that I was feeling. And my smoking became, from a recreational thing, I immediately started smoking weed every single day. And admittedly, before, I started hanging out with a crowd of people who were very much using, and these homies were using all kinds of things from ketamine, marijuana, alcohol, cocaine, ecstasy. And, my drug use was, starting to become more frequent. But by the time the breakup happened, I kind of gave myself in towards abandonment, and my behavior significantly changed, and the way that I chose to deal with this overwhelming sense of pain was by using and using and using and using as much, and as many drugs as possible. And there was like a before and after, right? So I started probably smoking marijuana every day. Not probably, I started smoking, definitely. I started smoking marijuana every single day. If there was alcohol around, I started binge drinking. If there were other substances around, such as like ketamine or cocaine or ecstasy, I started doing those. And I was high every single day of my life. I stopped at one point going to university. I was also enrolled in a gym, and I stopped going there. And, I started hanging out with not a weird crowd of people, but I just started hanging around with other addicts and other people whose drug consumption was, more moderate or heavy than somebody who's using recreationally. And I started trying to go to parties every single day or bars every single day. And then there was a period where I started doing a lot of cocaine, and, I was awake for a long period of time. Long periods of time, I'm talking about being awake for multiple days. And while I was awake, I was probably doing more cocaine, and I was just smoking marijuana, drinking liquor. And eventually, I started hanging out with drug dealers themselves. I met a few homies who were dealing, and one homie who was specifically dealing cocaine and ketamine. And we kind of kicked it off at a bar where we met. And, a little bit of time passes by. I'm regularly hanging out with this guy. I'm inviting him over to the apartment where I was staying. And bro, it started, de-escalating. It started transforming into pretty much like a hellscape or hellbent scenario. This homie who was a dealer was also, I wouldn't say friends with the people that he used to deal with, but he hung out with people that he would sell, cocaine or ketamine or even crack to. And this homie started inviting these people over to the apartment where I was staying. And bro, at one point, I think my apartment converted itself into like not a trap house, but I started seeing every day people I had never met in my life, and there were a lot of junkies. And these junkies were not even sitting in like couches. They were like literally sitting like reclined against the wall on the floor, lying on the floor. And some of them even had like spoons. They were smoking crack. Some of them were just tripping on something. And, the descent into madness became even more visceral. I didn't even start questioning or doing anything about it. I just kind of, rode the wave, if that makes any sense. And I wasn't doing anything to check the homie or to check the people who were coming into the apartment, to do all kinds of things, just because I was also one of them. And it was also very convenient for me to have the plug 24 hours a day, right? And I was doing drugs. It came to a point, bro, where I was doing multiple things at once, cocaine, ketamine, marijuana, alcohol, and crack. And the only method of communication I had with my family back in Venezuela from China was Skype, right? And I basically started ditching Skype because I didn't want to talk to my parents or my siblings. And then they started to piece, two and two together, and they assumed something was going wrong. And right about the time where my mom and my older sister came to visit me in Shanghai, China, one of the most, one of the things that, it's not like I regret, but one of the things I was most ashamed of for a while was, I gave him the address, or they knew the address of where I used to live. And they literally knock on the door at one point, and I can hear their voice. I recognize, my mom and my sister. And they're like, "Hey, we're here." And bro, I opened the door of the apartment where I was staying at, and they had to see like this shit. They had to see my dealer. They had to see, all kinds of drug paraphernalia around. And they saw other homies just like tripping. And their faces from like feeling a lot of joy, and they were smiling, they were vibrant. Their faces from that, in just one snap of a finger, they were like, "Oh shit," and you could see, I guess the sorrow, man, or just, I don't know, the pain. They were like, "Who the fuck are these people? What are they doing here? What is going on?" And I had an intervention, basically. And I was immediately sent back home from China to Venezuela. And this is around the time where, as soon as I immediately returned, my parents did not know what to do with me. And they didn't know it was that bad. Kind of because I also told them that it wasn't that serious, I lied a lot back then. And they thought it wasn't like a very critical thing for me to be sent to rehab. And I also told them, I was going through a rough patch emotionally, thanks to being lovesick or heartbroken and ending things terribly with my ex at the time. So they were like, "All right, we're not going to send you to a rehab. You're basically going to spend X amount of time, however it has to be, days, weeks, months, years, at your dad's farm in a different state in Venezuela." And yeah, I basically spent like a year and some change at my dad's place, which is like located in a very remote area. And I wasn't doing any drugs there. There weren't any drugs like available or whatnot. But I think I went to a psychiatrist, and the homie, the psychiatrist, he prescribed, I think it was Prozac, and Prozac was kind of like a high in itself, taking Prozac, and it basically made me felt like extremely numb and lifeless. And then I also kind of got addicted to that feeling of being numb or lifeless. And the doses of Prozac that this homie gave me were, insane. And I was also pretty much not high all the time, but for many hours throughout the day, I was just pretty much lifeless, right? And I was bedridden. I didn't want to do anything. I was incredibly depressed. I was unmotivated. I was lost. I was just, and this behavior started kind of becoming a cyclical occurrence in my life. I would do a lot of drugs, then I would either, get sent somewhere. The first time it was at my dad's place, then it was multiple rehabs, right? But the cycle of, like doing a lot of drugs, then going to rehab again clean, then staying sober a little bit on the streets, then doing drugs again, spiraling out of control, and getting sent back into rehab. That happened a lot, throughout my life. And I can definitely attest that my cross, or the burden that I had to carry, and the reason I was doing a lot of drugs, was because I was just emotionally immature. And I was emotionally incapable of dealing with, pain, or dealing with quote unquote traumatic experiences. All the emotional baggage that I was carrying from a little kid, and then breaking up with my girlfriend, and just it being so visceral. I was not willing to, seek therapy, or be vulnerable, or, sit with it sober minded and try to piece the puzzle together, and trying to cope with things without the use of alcohol or marijuana or cocaine, or any drug. I was just very emotionally immature. And the way that I chose to deal with things, or to deal with this pain, was by constantly using. And yeah, it became like a motif. It became a recurring theme. Something bad happened. If I was dealing with intense emotional feelings, and every time they felt like overwhelming, I just used. I just used drugs. And it wasn't until I was like 30 something, after just living and spamming that cycle endlessly for over 12 years, I was like, I've had enough, man. Like it came to a point that if I kept using, regardless of what drug it was, alcohol, marijuana, cocaine, if I kept using, I was probably either going to end up in a jail, in a prison, in a hospital, or in a mental institution, in a psychiatric ward, or basically homeless in the streets, or worst case scenario, dead, right? That's what they tell you when you get kind of institutionalized. And those are really the most probable outcomes for a drug addict, right? You either go to jail, go to prison, go to a hospital, to a mental institution, or you die, right? And I was basically tired of being that person, and endlessly spamming that cycle. And I was like, nah, man, and well, I also got a lot of help, therapeutic, my friends. I started using my family as a support system. And I chose to be more transparent and more vulnerable, and see, if all these tools and all these things that were willing to help me, like my family or therapy or actually taking rehab seriously. I was like, yeah, I need to be, if I don't choose to deal with this with the support system and by my own terms sober, then yeah, I'm literally going to die, or I'm literally going to end up in one of these places. And I refused. And well, in 12 years of consistent drug usage, or in 12 years of consistently living through, getting clean, using, going to rehab again, getting clean, using, going to rehab again, the cumulative of bad experiences or terrible experiences, they just start building up to a point, and the descent into the abyss gets always more significantly, more insane and more painful. Maybe one day or in one episode, you're using drugs and, you don't come back home for like 3 days or even a week, and you refuse to eat. You're kind of homeless. You're spending time in shady places. You're going to people's houses you've never met, or you're going to a strange hood you've never been into. And you just get surrounded by all these experiences that they start accumulating, and over time they start getting more insane. And just the places where addiction can take you, or drug abuse or drug consumption, just the bad, the sickening, the twisted, the just downright diabolical and demonic places the consumption of drugs can take you. They're just crazy. Like when you're sober, you start thinking like, how the hell, like, did I ever get into this situation? And 99% of the time, it's going to be because you're using something or you're addicted to something. And, I'm not here to judge myself or judge you if you are going through a rough patch. But at the very least, what I can tell you as an ex-drug addict or a drug addict or a person who had a turbulent relationship with drugs, I can at least tell you that drugs aren't the answer to deal with emotional problems. Quite the contrary, drugs are going to become your crucifix or your deathbed should you decide to start dealing with your emotions by using drugs. And believe me, there's going to be a moment where you're going to decide something. Like, it could be very quick. You are probably, at your home, you just, got a bag of cocaine from the plug. You probably have a few grams, you're doing a few lines, and maybe you were playing video games, and maybe you were taking care of your work before, maybe you were, standing on business, as they would say before, but 5 to 6 to 7 lines of cocaine in, you're gonna be like, I want to get on my car and I want to drive at 200 kilometers per hour, and I want to go to a different state to do XYZ. And in that course of action, you might completely fuck up your life. All right? It happens that quickly, and the decisions that you start taking under the influence might really jeopardize you. Like, the outcomes are really, you're either bedridden in a hospital, you either go to jail, you either go to prison, you either end up in a mental institution forever, or you might just simply die, bro. So, yeah, And I was that person who could have ended up there. And fortunately, I'm right here making a YouTube video or recording this YouTube video. And I hope for the people who know and are familiar with me and my content, you might already know this. You might already, I'm pretty open about my drug use. And yeah, I really have nothing to hide. I'm not ashamed of anything anymore. And whether I regret doing the things that I did, I don't regret them because I love who I am right now and I love what I have going on. And I'm very, separated from the person who I used to be. And I also made peace with that. But yeah, I could say that I'm still very much ashamed and I'm not proud of the things that I did. And I hurt a lot of people. And I was basically traveling or walking a road towards self-destruction and like complete annihilation. I definitely do feel a certain type of way. I'm not really proud of the things that I did. But then again, I'm not here to sentence myself or judge myself or judge you if you are going through something. And if you can relate, if you are going through anything that, remotely close to what I was going through, it's never too late to start doing something significant or something substantial to change your life from going to a wrong place. You can always decide to have a better life or go towards the right place. If it happened to me, and if it's happened to thousands, if not millions of recovering addicts or drug addicts, it can also happen to you. But you have to be honest with yourself, and you also pretty much have to be at the point where you're just tired of living through this cycle endlessly. Sometimes it takes years, decades, but eventually we all have like a moment where it's just so dark, but it's like the lowest of the lowest of the lowest point of your of your walk through addiction, and it can't get worse than that. And you refuse to go through something like that again, and you start going back up. And yeah, man, drugs are kind of demonic. They disguise themselves at one point like something very romantic, like you're gonna have the best time of your life, or yeah, something very endearing. And it all kind of leads you, if you can't control yourself, you're definitely going to descend into the abyss or into madness. Today there are a lot of distractions. Today there are even crazier drugs than before, and I just want you to look out for yourself, bro. And again, it's never too late to start making right choices, or to start taking and moving towards a better place. Drugs are definitely not the answer, and drugs are definitely not the best. I would argue they're the worst ways to cope with something that you are definitely dealing with emotionally or psychologically. Drugs are not the answer. I think that's the biggest thing that I want to echo, or the biggest thing that I want to say to you right now, is if you are going to, use substances to cope, believe me, you are going to end in a more diabolical place the more time passes by. So, yeah, that's me. That's my story. I basically started spiraling out of control, and my drug addiction kicked in heavy when I was 19 years old. And I was basically in a cycle of doing drugs, getting into trouble, getting into a lot of trouble. And going into rehab, staying clean for a little bit, and then back to using, then back to, mischief and causing trouble and fucking up a lot, and then going back into rehab, then staying clean for a bit. Yo, this happened for, I am not kidding, maybe 14 years. All right. And after 14 years, I basically said, I'm done with this shit. I'm done. Why? Because if I keep this behavior, and if I prolong this cycle, and I still, do the same thing over and over and over again, I'm basically going to end up in jail, bedridden, in a mental asylum, in prison, or dead, or homeless, and just in the streets. And hell no, bro. That is not life. So if this video kind of helped you, or if you enjoyed this video, let me know in the comments down below. If you guys want me to talk about these things more so in a YouTube video format than in a live stream format, also let me know. I'm pretty happy to be able to, to do shit like this, because maybe it kind of resonates with you, or even better, maybe it helps you. So I'm here for you, my G. And so I guess I will see you in the next YouTube video or in the next live stream. And with that being said, have a good day, stay safe, stay happy, stay cozy, and I'll see you soon.